Regina and Calvin met in college when they were both juniors at USC. Since they both lived in Florence, South Carolina, they stayed on campus, which was located in Columbia, since it was too much to drive home each day. Regina was studying for her bachelor's degree in nursing and Calvin was studying for his bachelor's in accounting. They met and fell in love immediately. She had been warned not to get involved with him, but she listened to her heart instead of taking heed to the warnings that were given to her. She thought the girls that were warning her to stay away from him were jealous of their relationship, so she didn't listen. Her parents even tried to warn her that something just wasn't right about Calvin, but Regina refused to take anyone's advice. She felt that she was grown and she knew what she was doing. The two of them dated for a short 8 months before they decided they were ready to marry. Her parents did not agree with them getting married so soon, but they supported her anyway and hoped she wasn't making a big mistake. The two married and moved from Florence, South Carolina to Columbia permanently to start their new life. After they both graduated, he went to work for a local accounting firm, and she got hired as a nurse at Providence Hospital. Married life was good for the couple in the beginning, and then things started to change drastically. While they were dating, Calvin had shared stories about his childhood with Regina. He told her how when he was 12 years old his father had killed his mother by beating her to death right in front of him. His father always beat on his mother every time she did something that he felt annoyed him, so the beatings were frequent. He grew up watching his mother being beat for this or that reason, and he couldn't understand why his mother stayed with his father. Calvin hated his father and often wished he would die so that he and his mother would be free of him. He would sometimes try to jump in and protect his mother, but that only caused him to be the object of his father's aggression. Then, his father was sent to prison where he was sentenced to life, so Calvin was left alone. He didn't have any other siblings since he was an only child. He was sent to live with his grandparents, and so they had raised him until he went off to college. He told Regina of how he had nightmares for years after his mother's death and how the scene would replay over and over again in his head. He would wake up screaming for his mother in the middle of the night. She felt so sorry for him and how he had grown up seeing his mother get beaten every day. Calvin promised her that he would never do anything like that to her. He vowed to never be like his father because he didn't believe in putting his hands on women. She believed him that he would never hurt her, so she never had any doubt in his sincerity. Little did she know he would repeat the same patterns as his father and she would be the victim of his anger soon. The first time Calvin put his hands on Regina happened just a year after they were married. She was at a restaurant waiting for him to meet her there. While she was waiting for him, a guy she knew from college came to her table to speak to her. It was an innocent conversation, but when Calvin walked up, he didn't see it that way. "Is that you, Regina?" a voice called out. Regina looked up from the menu she had been browsing through and searched the small restaurant for the source of the voice. Her eyes lit up excitedly at the sight of one of her college buddies, Michael, as he made his way over to her table. They were pretty close while they were at USC because they were both studying for a nursing degree. They had become good friends and hung out often studying together. Squinting her eyes so that she could see him better, she asked, "Michael?" "Yes, it's me," he replied as he reached to give Regina a friendly hug. "Oh my goodness!" she squealed, "I wondered what happened to you. You left in our junior year." "Yes, I did. I had a family emergency. My father was diagnosed with cancer, and I took it hard because we were close. I couldn't concentrate on my schoolwork because I was so worried about him," Michael said as he sat down across from Regina at the table. "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that," she responded as she reached over and patted his hand in comfort. "Yeah, it messed me up. My father lived in Florida, so I transferred down there to finish my nursing degree so that I could be closer to him in his last moments." "How is he doing?" "He died a few months after I got down there." Glancing at him with a sympathetic look, she replied, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. That must have been hard on you." "Yeah, it still hurts when I think about it, but let's not talk about sad times. What have you been up to?" he said, changing the subject quickly as his eyes glistened with tears. "Nothing much. Just working. I graduated, and I work at Providence Hospital. I have been there for a year now. Oh really? That's good. I work over at Palmetto Health. I just moved back here a few months ago. That's great. She said, smiling. Well, I see somebody's married, Michael said, noticing her wedding ring. Yes, I am. I married Calvin. Do you remember him? Y'all were dating in college, right? Grinning proudly, she flashed her ring and answered, yes, we were. We got married a year ago. Okay, Michael said, looking at Regina with a hesitant look on his face. What? She asked, noticing the look on his face. Do you know everything about Calvin? Yes. Of course, I do. What are you talking about? Well, rumor has it that that dude is crazy. Some of the girls that used to date him said he has a problem with his hands, if you know what I mean? Michael answered. What? No, Regina responded, laughing at Michael's revelation. Those girls were just making that up. They tried to tell me some crazy stuff like that too, but I have never had a problem with Calvin. He is the sweetest man I know. He loves me, and I love him too. Well, I'm just telling you to be careful. There has to be some truth to it if different people are saying the same thing. Well, I don't listen to rumors and stuff like that. People are just jealous of what we have. Trust me, Regina. No one is jealous of you and Calvin. If I were you, I would run for the hills. That dude is batshit crazy. Thanks for your concern, but things with us are great. There is nothing for anyone to worry about. She responded, shaking her head with a smile on her face. Okay, I'm just warning you to be careful. Things aren't always as they seem. He said, smiling back at her. You know I just want to see you happy. And that I am, she replied, your warning is duly noted. So, what do we have here? Calvin asked with a tight smile on his face as he walked up to the table, interrupting their conversation. Oh, baby! Regina shrieked, holding her hand against her chest in surprise. I didn't hear you come in. I know you didn't. You were too busy grinning in this dude's face to hear me. He replied. Oh no, it's nothing like that, baby. This is my old classmate Michael from college. Don't you remember him? We used to hang out and study a lot. He just moved back to town, and we were just catching up. She quickly explained. Michael got up from the table and stretched out his hand to Calvin for a shake. Calvin just looked down at his hand in disgust and left it hanging in midair. Michael, seeing that he was not going to shake his hand, dropped it back down to his side. He could tell that Calvin saw more into the situation than there was by his body language. There was nothing between him and Regina. They were just catching up, but he wasn't going to stick around to get into it with him over nothing. Before he made his exit, Michael turned to Regina and said, well, it was nice catching up with you. You take care now. He had given her a warning look before he left. He could tell by Calvin's attitude that things were not going to go well. He had an angry scowl on his face for no reason. It wasn't his problem to worry about though. He tried to warn her, but he could tell that it didn't do any good. Regina was living in a bubble, and when that bubble popped, he hoped that she could handle what came from it. Michael strolled out of the restaurant and made his way to his car. He got in and drove away, leaving Regina and her problems behind him. Let's go, Calvin demanded, as he motioned for Regina to get up from the table. Protesting, she said, what? You just got here. We haven't ordered yet. You would have had plenty of time to order something if you weren't so busy grinning in that man's face, he retorted angrily. What? It was nothing like that. We were just talking. Don't you want to go ahead and order something? I'm not hungry. Well, can I at least order me something to go? No. We can eat something at home, he said as he tugged at her arm to make her get up. She got up with a huff and followed behind him as they left the restaurant. She couldn't understand what his problem was. If he wasn't hungry, that was fine, but he could have at least let her get something to eat. She walked silently behind him as they walked over to their separate cars. He told her to follow him home and not to stop anywhere as he got into his car and started it up. She was confused at his behavior, and she was going to get down to the bottom of it as soon as they got home. The way he was acting was ridiculous. When they pulled up to their subdivision, Calvin pulled into the driveway first, and Regina pulled in beside him. He didn't say a word to her as he walked to the front door and slid his key in the door and unlocked it. She lingered in the car for a few minutes trying to decide what she would say to him, then she too made her way to the front door. When she walked in, she slid off her shoes and closed the front door behind her. As soon as she turned around, Calvin was there in her face. "You are a fucking disrespectful bitch. You sitting in another man's face grinning when you're a married woman," he shouted. A vein began to bulge at his temple as he yelled. "You are married to me. You are not supposed to be giggling and smiling with another man. I will not stand for that," he said, pointing his finger sharply to his chest. But her words were abruptly cut off as his hand swiftly came across her face in a hard slap. "Shut the fuck up," he roared. "I don't want to hear your fucking lies. I know you're going to fix your mouth and say you weren't flirting with that man, but what you don't know is I had been there for a while watching you. I saw you rubbing that man's hand and smiling all in his face, so don't lie to me." "But Calvin, I didn't do anything," she tried, protesting again. Tears sprang into Regina's eyes. She placed her hand on her face where he had slapped her. She felt the sting from the slap as she stared at him in terror. She was shocked and horrified at his actions. Immediately Michael's warnings started replaying in her head. She began questioning her decision to get involved with Calvin. Was what everyone was saying true? Was he following in his father's footsteps? This was only just a slap, but would it get worse? She didn't know any of the answers to the questions she had running through her mind. "Oh, baby, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to hit you. I don't know what came over me," Calvin quickly tried to explain as he dropped down to his knees and grabbed her hand, clasping it in his. Regina cried out, "Calvin, I can't believe you just hit me. I am so sorry, baby. I didn't mean it. I just got so angry seeing you sitting there laughing and smiling with another man. I apologize for hitting you. I will never do anything like that again. I promise, baby," he pleaded as he held her in his arms as she cried. "You promised me that you would never raise a hand to me," she said, sniffling back tears. With tears running down his face, he replied, "I know, baby, and I am so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You know I didn't. I love you. I don't know what came over me." The two of them sat there on the floor together, holding each other as they cried. Regina crying for the broken promise Calvin made to her, and Calvin for doing the one thing he vowed that he never would do. He begged and pleaded for her forgiveness as they released their emotions through their tears. After sitting huddled together for about an hour, Regina wiped her eyes and told Calvin that she forgave him. She also told him that he better not ever do anything like that again. He promised that it was the first and last time he would ever put his hands on her. They kissed passionately there on the floor as he tried his best to make things right with her. Needless to say, that was the start of 9 years of being his constant punching bag. You know what they say. Once he hits you the first time and gets away with it, that is only the beginning. Dash. "Oh!" Regina screamed as Calvin's foot connected with her ribs. Delivering another kick to Regina's side, he yelled, "I've told you about running your fucking mouth so much. Please, Calvin, stop," she begged as she tried unsuccessfully to stop him from kicking her repeatedly. "You think I'm fucking playing with you, don't you?" he screamed as he continued kicking her. "What have I told your ass about messing up my food?" "I'm sorry, Calvin. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to burn the rice. I'll do it right next time." "You damn right you're going to do it right next time. Right damn now," he yelled as he dragged her up from the floor by her t-shirt and dragged her into the kitchen. Calvin was upset because Regina had accidentally let the rice cook for a little too long because she was on the phone talking to one of her friends. He liked his food cooked a certain way, and if it wasn't done the way he liked, he had a problem. This was just one of the many ass whippings over the years that she had received for one thing or another. After that initial incident at the restaurant, Calvin did not keep his word. That was just the start of the downward spiral of their marriage. He beat her every opportunity he got. He was very jealous, and any man that he saw talking to her, he assumed they were trying to holler at her, and that turned her an ass whipping even if it wasn't true. If she didn't come home at a particular time, he would accuse her of sleeping with someone else, and he would beat her for that too. He wanted to know where she was at all times of the day. He even popped up at her job just to make sure that she was really there. He monitored her phone calls whenever he could to make sure that she wasn't disclosing to anyone what was going on in their household. Over the years he had gotten so controlling and abusive that Regina could barely leave the house to visit her parents. When they wanted to know why she didn't come to visit like she used to, she would come up with excuses why she couldn't come over. The real reason was she didn't want them to see all the bruises that Calvin was constantly putting on her. He was beating her so much that it was almost on a daily basis. She let out a shriek of pain as she grabbed at her stomach. She rolled around on the floor where she still lay moaning from the pain. She was 3 months pregnant, and she had a feeling that she was having another miscarriage. This would be her third one thanks to him. She had been pregnant 2 years ago but lost the baby when he threw her down a flight of stairs when she hadn't answered the phone when he had called. The first time he caused her miscarriage was because he pushed her out of the moving car while they were in the middle of an argument. She wasn't seriously hurt because the car wasn't going that fast, but when she landed on the ground she fell on her stomach, and she lost the baby. Calvin looked down at her in disgust as he saw red fluid leaking from between her legs. Glaring down at her body sprawled on the floor, he demanded, "Get your nasty ass up and clean yourself up." "Help me, Calvin," Regina whispered. "I think I'm losing the baby." She screamed out as she felt another sharp pain shoot through her stomach and more fluid gushed from between her legs. "It's all your fucking fault," he complained as he yanked her up from the floor and threw her over his shoulder. "You can't do shit right. Can't even carry my baby to term. Just fucking useless." He continued ranting on. He went to the kitchen counter, grabbed his car keys and walked out the door. He walked up the driveway to his car and unlocked the passenger side. He opened the door, tossed Regina in and slammed the door behind her. He walked over to the driver's side and hopped in and started the car. The drive was silent except for the occasional moans from Regina as she continued to grip her stomach in pain. "You better not tell them doctors shit either," he warned as he drove to the nearest hospital. "If they ask you anything, tell them you fell down the stairs. Do you hear me?" he asked, staring a hole into her. Mustering up a bit of strength, she squeaked in a small voice, "Yes." When they finally arrived at the hospital, Calvin got out and ran into the emergency room to ask for help with Regina. 2 nurses came out immediately and attended to her. They lifted her from the car and placed her on a gurney. They rushed her into the hospital and behind the double doors. Once he parked the car, he made his way into the waiting room and up to the front desk. He got the necessary paperwork that he would need to fill out and found a chair to sit in. Once he filled out all of the papers, he took them back to the desk and waited to see if he could get any information about his wife. The lady at the desk held up a finger to him to wait till she dialed a number and waited for the call to be answered. She talked for a few minutes before she hung up. She filled out a visitor's pass for him and gave him the directions to Regina's room. He made his way to the elevator and pressed the button for the floor that she was on. Once the doors opened on her floor, he searched until he found the correct room. When he walked in, Regina was lying in a hospital bed while a nurse was taking her vitals. There were tear stains on her face, so he knew she had been crying. "Hey, baby," he greeted innocently as he entered the room. "Hey," she replied sullenly. "How are you feeling, baby?" he asked as he walked over to her and gave her a hug and a peck on the lips. "Well, I will leave you two alone. I will be back, Mrs. Richards, to check on you," the nurse said as she exited the room, giving Calvin a sideways glance of disapproval. "I'm fine, Calvin. I lost the baby, but you already knew that," she said, looking away so that he wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. "Well, If you didn't make me do these things to you, then this wouldn't keep happening now, would it? He asked as he roughly turned her face back toward him. No, Calvin, it wouldn't. Regina had stopped herself before she went any further. He glared at her angrily and asked, "It wouldn't what?" "Nothing," she replied, looking down at her hands. "That's what I thought. If your ass were anything of a wife, then I wouldn't have to put my hands on you. Get your ass dressed and come on. I don't have all day to be in here with you. I got shit to do," he commanded. In a weak protest, she said, "But Calvin, I just had a miscarriage. I can't leave yet. When I come back in here you better be dressed and ready to go, and I'm not going to say it again," he said as he walked out of the room. Regina began pulling the IV drip from her arm as she ripped off the heart monitor equipment. As soon as she did, a loud siren-like sound came from the device. The nurse ran in quickly in a panic to see what was going on. When she arrived, she saw that Regina had disconnected herself from the devices she had been hooked up to. She ran over and turned the wailing siren off and turned towards her. With a frightened look plastered on her face, the nurse said, "Mrs. Richards, you can't go yet. You just had a miscarriage." "I know, but I got to go," she replied as she spotted her clothing on the chair that was next to her bed. The nurse took a deep breath before she said, "Mrs. Richards, I have to ask you a personal question. Did your husband do this to you?" "No. I told y'all I fell down the stairs." "Mrs. Richards, the doctor and I do not believe your story. The bruises that we saw on your body do not consist of falling from the stairs. Some of those bruises are old, so they have healed." "Well, I don't know what else to tell you. I fell down the stairs, and that's that. Y'all can think whatever y'all want, but that's what happened," Regina said as she put on her clothes in a hurry. "Mrs. Richards, if your husband is abusing you, we can help. We can get you into a shelter, and we can file charges against him. All you have to do is say that you want our help," the nurse pleaded, looking at her with sympathy. Used to this normal line of questioning, Regina recited, "No. My husband doesn't hurt me. He loves me." She didn't believe her words, but she said what she felt she had to get the nurse off her back. She hated the ground that Calvin walked on, but she kept her true feelings to herself. Every time she showed up at a new hospital with injuries, they always said the same thing to her. If she wanted to, she could have recited the words right along with the nurse. That's how often she heard them. "Mrs. Richards, I can tell that you're lying. I would advise you to get some help before it's too late. Men like that don't change. If he promises you that it will never happen again, it is a lie. I would hate to see you on the 11 o'clock news because your husband has killed you. Please let us help you." "As my wife says she doesn't need your help," Calvin interrupted, glaring at the nurse angrily as he stomped his way back into the room. "Well, Mrs. Richards, I will need you to go to the front desk and fill out the paperwork stating that you willingly signed yourself out of the hospital against medical advice," the nurse said as she looked at Regina with pity and walked out of the room shaking her head. "Let's go," Calvin demanded as he gripped Regina's arm tightly and dragged her from the room and over to the receptionist's desk for her to fill out the papers. Once that was complete, they got on the elevator in silence and rode it down to the ground floor. They walked out and headed for the car. They both got in, and Regina closed her eyes and laid her head on the passenger side window as Calvin started the car and drove away from the hospital. He glanced over at her several times during the drive home, but he didn't say a word. Once they arrived home, they went into the house and she went straight to their bedroom. She laid down on the bed and cried herself to sleep like she did just about every night.